Welcome to Turnitin for Teaching and Learning. This is a workshop hosted by Learning Design and Digital Innovation, or LDDI, in the Faculty of Education. My name is Gabrielle Coombs. I will be presenting today on Turnitin. I am a learning designer at LDDI, and I'm joined today by my colleague Christopher, who will to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christopher. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Learning Technology Rover in the Learning Design and Digital Innovation Unit.
Before we get into the meat of today's presentation, we would, of course, like to respectfully acknowledge that LDDI and UBC Vancouver is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. These lands and places are steeped in the histories and knowledge of the original peoples of these territories, and the faculty's activities take place on Indigenous lands, not just in UBC Vancouver, but throughout British Columbia and beyond. We would like to extend the opportunity for anyone joining us today who is not joining from the same location as UBCV to also share where they're joining from today. So today, going through Turnitin, we're going to do a bit of an overview of the tool, go through some of the affordances of using it, as well as some of the issues. And then we'll also go through a pretty detailed demonstration of how to get set up with Turnitin, just in terms of your account, but then also in terms of setting up assignments and utilizing some of its features. And then we'll kind of discuss some of the more educative approaches to the implementation of the tool as well. So I'm going to hand over to Christopher, who is going to do a brief overview of what Turnitin is.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gabby. So as Gabby mentioned, I'm just going to chat a little bit more about the overview of what Turnitin is. So Turnitin is a UBC-supported text matching tool that compares submitted work with a database of more than 337 million other student papers, web pages, and academic books and articles. After comparing an assignment with the database, Turnitin automatically generates an originality report or a similarity report for the submission that tells students how much of their writing matches writing from previously existing sources as well. But of course, beyond that feature, Turnitin does have many grading features and peer review functionality, all which we will explore later on in today's session. Next slide. All right, so it's important to note that if you have used Turnitin before at a different institution, that the institution is able to turn on and off certain features. So here at UBC, these are the current features that are enabled through Turnitin. So the first one is an assignment submission Dropbox with grading functionality. This works very similar to Canvas assignments, if you're familiar with that, in the sense that students are able to submit an assignment, you're able to view it, and you can also grade it there as well. A key feature of Turnitin as well is the plagiarism checker through the similarity report. What the similarity report does is it kind of goes through the student submission and it flags the different areas of their paper that might have been flagged somewhere, that might match somewhere else, whether that's another student paper, a website, an academic journal, anything like that, and provide a percentage score there as well. Another feature we have here is the grammar checking tool. So if you'd like students to check their grammar or their spelling, there's actually this really cool tool in Turnitin where it's able to check all of that, as well as categorize the different grammatical errors that might exist in the paper as well. And the last feature here is the peer review through PeerMark. So PeerMark is Turnitin's peer review system. And in comparison to Canvas, it is a little more comprehensive in that it allows the instructor to do a little bit more of a guided peer review, but we'll go over more about what that looks like in a moment as well. Next slide. Thank you. So some key features that are disabled here at UBC. The first one is the AI detection tool. And this one is actually pretty current and a very recent news headline, I would say. So the tool currently is designed, or the AI detection tool is designed to detect work that was potentially written by AI. But UBC has made the decision to not actually enable that feature here. And there's actually a very interesting article written by the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology that highlights the decision-making process, why they decided not to enable it as well, all of which can be found in the chat as well. And really, it just comes down to the fact that they haven't had much time to really experiment with the tool and that it might not be actually accurate in detecting AI either. Another unavailable feature here is the integration with Canvas. So if you've worked at other institutions, you may have had Turnitin integrated into Canvas. Here at UBC, it is not. So what that does mean is that students will have to make their own accounts, and as well as any grading or any comments you make on Turnitin will all have to be transferred over into Canvas and in your gradebook if you so choose. Now, the last thing here is the Learning Analytics dashboard is also unavailable. So the dashboard that provides more data visualizations and more visual representations of those learning analytics, that is currently unavailable. But with that being said, the raw data itself is available for you to play around with if you so choose. And with that, I'll pass over to Gabby to chat a little bit more about our next part.
Pardon me, I am muted. Thank you. So thank you, Chris. And we're going to be going now into some of the affordances and issues with Turnitin. We'll start first with some of the real benefits of using Turnitin. And really the big piece, I think, is that students become more aware of academic integrity. The key feature, as Chris was saying earlier, is the similarity report, which is generated each time a student submits an assignment. And what this does is it flags, again, similarities between other papers or websites or articles that are found in its database. But it also then, with that, sort of shows them where that's come from, and students can compare what they have in their paper to these other samples. If you have students who are maybe not quoting things accurately, their citations aren't being done appropriately, this is a really good way for them to see exactly what their problems are. They can see where their work is already being used, or in this case, probably not their own work, and then make adjustments accordingly. The other really big affordance, I think, in more recent exploration of this tool is the peer review function. If you've ever used Canvas peer review, you may notice that it is a little limiting in some ways. I mean, the integration obviously is really helpful, but there are issues with things like anonymity. It's very difficult to guide peer review. And there are other sort of functions of the peer review that can make it a little sort of not as comprehensive or as helpful, really, in guiding students to make sort of constructive feedback for their peers. So I will say, and we'll go through it in more detail when we demonstrate, that the peer review function on Turnitin is pretty good. Definitely in comparison to Canvas, and it allows a little bit more flexibility in terms of how you might want your students to do their peer review, and gives you as the instructor a little more opportunity to guide peer review so that it remains constructive as well. The other piece too, if you're interested in learning analytics, is that you do have the actual raw data available, even if you don't have access to the sort of visualized report, as we mentioned earlier. So what you could do is you can access a CSV file, which you could open with Excel or Google Sheets or a similar program. And it can tell you information about when a paper was submitted, the percentage of the similarity report, whether students have looked at your feedback. So the data is available. It's just not going to be turned into visualizations that make it easily consumable. So if you're interested in actually having that raw data, absolutely, this is a really big benefit of the tool. But because we don't have that other feature enabled, it might be a little more difficult to consume just by looking at it. So I think those are the three really big affordances of the tool. But of course, with any technology, even if there are benefits, there are also issues. And so the big issue that I think that we see is the submission of assignments to this database. So as Chris mentioned, there is this enormous database with millions of papers based on not just what Turnitin has found online on the internet or through journals, but also through submissions from students. So at UBC, we have two options. We can either add people's papers or submissions to the database, or we can not do that. It doesn't mean that they won't be able to compare their work against this database. It means that their paper won't be added to this database to be used then by Turnitin as a whole. So if you're going to have this feature turned on, we really want to press that students should be aware that their work is being added to this database. But if you're unsure about what to do, we would recommend just turning this feature off. It's turned off by default, so it's not any extra steps, but it's just something to be mindful of, that, this is a student's intellectual property, and they may not be happy with their work being added to a huge database to be used for this function. So just something to be mindful of. Obviously, the lack of Canvas integration is frustrating, to say the least, especially if you've used Turnitin in another institution which does do this. It carries a few things. So first of all, the fact that students have to make their own account, it means that they need to sign up using using an email of their choice. And sometimes, especially given the sort of state of Turnitin, it has undergone a privacy impact assessment, and it can be really good at sort of keeping things private, provided students sign up in a way that doesn't identify them personally. So there is some really great privacy language that LT Hub has provided in their Turnitin instructor guide. It is pretty close to the top of the page, and it's just a short paragraph instructing students on how they can make an account using a pseudonym, so that it is as non-identifying as possible. So, just being mindful that if you're going to ask students to make an account, that to take their privacy into consideration as well. And then the last piece really is, because this is so linked to the ideas of plagiarism and academic integrity, you may have some students who view the use of Turnitin as a slightly punitive approach to plagiarism. By uploading their work to Turnitin, they may feel like you don't trust them. And that's not to say that that is definitely the case. But I think if we don't caveat the use of the tool with any sort of mindfulness about taking it from the perspective as a learning tool, that some students may not feel particularly good about using it, just because it shows where they may be plagiarizing, which is very useful, but it may give them some anxiety as well. So just being mindful that the way that we use Turnitin can sort of impact how students feel about it. So just a warning as we go through looking at the tool in more detail. So with that, I'm going to pass back to Chris, who is going to demonstrate how to use Turnitin, from setting up an account to setting up assignments, peer review, looking at similarity reports, and so on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gabby. All right, let me just screen share here. All right, so this is what the homepage of Turnitin will look like. The first step actually is not to log into your account. The first step is to actually have an account created for you. So if you're an instructor here at UBC, in order to create a Turnitin account, you will need to make a request to LT Hub to have your account provisioned for you. In terms of what those steps look like, just check out the LT Hub's Turnitin instructor's guide, and they have the steps listed out for you there. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you finally gain access to your Turnitin account is to create a class. So in order to create a class, you just click this green button right here, plus add class. And the first thing you'll be asked to do is to determine the class type. Now, there are two types of classes in Turnitin. There's a master class and there's a standard class. A master class is intended for classes that have multiple sections to them. So then each section has their own section class, and they'll all go underneath the bigger master class. If your course only has one section, the standard class will suffice, and that's what we'll play with today. So there you'll give a name to your class. And then you'll also have to create an enrollment key. So it's important to recognize that the enrollment key is what students are going to be using to enroll in your Turnitin class. Now you can really set it up to whatever you want it to be. For today, I will just do test, but again, it can be whatever you want it to be. You'll also have to identify the subject area. Now for those in the Faculty of Education, unfortunately, education is not an option for some reason. So you'll just have to find an option that works best for you or works similarly to what you're doing. But in this case, I just use other. And then for student level, you'll select the level of your course as well. And then by default, the class start date is today's date, or the date that you create the class. And the end date is 1 year from the class start date. But of course, you can adjust this to be shorter or longer, depending on what you need as well. So once we create that class, you'll see that we have a class ID created as well as an enrollment key. It's important to note these two things down because these are the things that students will have to use to enroll in your class. But of course, if you forget them, no worries at all. You can still find them here in this class ID section, and as well as the enrollment key can be found in this underneath this cog in the edit tab. So in terms of what it looks like for students to enroll in this class, I'll just head over into student view. And you'll see that there's a navigation bar on the top left-hand corner of the screen. And for students, they'll see this enroll in a class button. They'll just click that. And then you'll provide the class ID or the section ID, as well as the enrollment key. And this will allow your students to enroll into your course. And of course, this is something we recommend that the students do instead of you having to manually add them, as it's a lot more time efficient that way as well. But of course, if you just have one student that is not able to join your class for any reason, you are still able to add them to your own class. You just head into your classes page, head into the students tab, and then you can add them manually here, or as well, you can upload a student list if you'd like. Now, in terms of you added your students, everyone's all enrolled, it's now time to create an assignment. Let's go over that. So in terms of creating an assignment, it's very similar to creating a class in that you'll click this green button in the top corner. And here you will be greeted with the assignment interface. So there's a few key things here to point out. We have the start date, due date, and end date, or the post dates, as well as where we'll be submitting the papers to and the file types as well. So the start date by default is the time that you created the assignment. So if you want to change it, you can. The due date is automatically 1 week from your start date. And the post date is when students will be able to see the instructor feedback, and that will be a day after the due date. So you can set those up accordingly, however you'd like for that's in line with your assignment. But for today, we'll just call it the test assignment. You can assign a point value if you'd like. And then as well, you can determine what type of file types you want to be submitted into Turnitin. So you can determine if you want only the files that Turnitin can check for similarity to be allowed, or you can have it allowed for any file type just to create an overall assignments Dropbox. Now, a really important question we do have here is where will this papers be submitted to? So as Gabby mentioned before, there are really two places that these papers can be submitted to. One of them is a standard paper repository, and one of them is no repository. So the standard paper repository is Turnitin's 337 million papers and things like that. That's the standard repository. So any paper that would be submitted here would also be submitted to Turnitin's database and repository. What we recommend doing is selecting no repository, meaning that the students will still be able to be compared against Turnitin's repository, but the paper itself will not be submitted into Turnitin's database to be compared for the future. So we recommend selecting no repository. And then under additional settings, there's some more settings you can tweak to really refine your assignment as well. You can change how late submissions are handled, if you want to include special instructions. And here are some more settings for the similarity report. So the first one here is to whether or not you want to generate the similarity reports. So again, the similarity report is that plagiarism checker. So we recommend turning that on. The next one is an important one. It's basically when are the similarity reports generated? So there are 3 options. 2 of them are immediately and 1 of them is on the due date. So this first one here, immediately, first report is final. What that means is students will they'll receive 1 attempt. And once they submit their attempt, the similarity report will be generated for them automatically. And the second one here is immediately, but can overwrite reports until due date. So what this means is that students are able to submit multiple times and receive multiple similarity reports. But as the name suggests, it overwrites reports until due dates, meaning that if a student resubmits it, the previous submission's similarity report will also no longer be available. So something to consider there as well. And the final one here is on due date, which basically means that the similarity reports will be created on the due date. So select this one. And then here you can further refine what is kind of flagged in the similarity report. So you can include or exclude bibliographic materials. So those are things like the citation list, if you want that to be flagged or not flagged. You can also include or exclude quoted materials, small sources, and things like that. What's nice is that Turnitin actually has these little question mark bubbles right here, and they explain what would actually be included or excluded if you did enable or disable those functions. Now, a very important feature we have here is whether or not you want to allow students to see the similarity reports. We recommend turning this on so that students are able to see the similarity reports and see kind of what's been flagged and kind of have that dialogue and conversation about that as well. But if you did want to, you can disable that as well. But again, we do recommend leaving it enabled. Here you can include an assignment template if you'd like, enable anonymous marking, and here you can further refine what Turnitin will compare the student's paper against. And the last thing here is the online grading section. So if you want to create a rubric or a form, you are more than welcome to. As well, Turnitin does have some built-in ones, but I will note they are kind of geared more towards K-12 education. So it might not be fitting for some assignments, might be fitting for other assignments. Feel free to use whatever works best for you as well. And the last thing here is this ETS e-reader functionality, which is basically a grammar checker. So as I mentioned before, the grammar checker it checks the student's grammar, and then it will highlight any errors that are made and categorize them accordingly. And one thing to note is that this feature only does work with English. So with that being said, we'll save this, and we'll see that we now have a test assignment created. Now, in terms of creating the peer assignment, that peer mark assignment, which is that peer review assignment, not too challenging to do either. You'll click that plus add assignment button again. You'll hit peer review. We'll hit the next steps. And the first thing you'll need to do is select a base assignment on which students will be comparing the assignments against, or for the peer review, I should say. So here we'll select the test assignment. You can determine how late submissions are handled as well. You can give it an assignment name. And by default, the assignment is anonymous in the sense that students can't see who's they're reviewing or who reviewed theirs, but you can enable that if you did want to here. And then one thing to note is that the start date for the peer review, it automatically defaults to the day after the due date, and it ends 2 weeks after that. So of course, if you do want to highlight or change any of that, you are more than welcome to as well. So we'll press save and continue. This next part here in the peer mark settings is to determine how many papers students will be reviewing, as well as if they will be selecting any to review themselves, and as well if you do want to enable a self-evaluation as well. So save and continue there. And this last part here is to kind of build a more guided peer review. And this is a little bit different from Canvas, I will say. So this first part here is that you can add instructions. You can add some instructions for students. You can also add some guiding questions for them as well. There's 2 types. There's a free response, which is basically an open text box, and as well there's a scale. So for the free response question, you can create a question. So maybe I'll do, what do you think are the strengths of this paper? You can add a minimum answer length. So I'll go with 50 words, and I'll just add the question. Pretty straightforward to do that as well. And you can also create a scale if you'd like. So maybe you want to rank the strength of the writer's thesis. You can rate them on scale from 1 to 5, maybe 1 being weak, 5 being strong. You can add that question as well. But in case you're not quite sure what questions you want to add either, no worries at all. If you click that add question button again, you'll see this sample library. And here is a list of different sample questions that you can add as well, if you'd like. So once we're complete with that, you just hit save and finish, and the peer mark assignment will now be available to view. So when I'll actually check out what the course, like what an actual Turnitin shell actually looks like with submissions and all that. So here's one that we created for today's session. This is our Turnitin workshop standard class. And we have 2 assignments here. We have the example assignment, one that includes the bibliographic materials in the to be checked against in that similarity report, and then as well as one that excludes the bibliographic materials. So when we click into the assignment, it will open up this dashboard. So you'll be able to see the students that have submitted the papers, as well as what they have submitted, and as well as a score for their similarity report as well. So I'll note here that I'll chat first about the including bibliographic materials and excluding bibliographic materials. So if you remember back to those settings that we enabled in the assignment settings, I enabled one that has the bibliographic materials included in the similarity index and one that excludes it. So this assignment here is submitted by Gabby, this ethical use of AI. So this one includes bibliographic materials, and it has a similarity score of 46%. But if we take a look at the excluding the bibliographic materials, we'll see that it only has a similarity score of 15% there. So the bibliographic materials, so the citation list, the reference list, it does actually make an impact on the similarity score as well. Now, in terms of opening up the feedback studio and checking out more details in the similarity score, all you'll have to do is just click into the assignment. So you'll just click that similarity score, and it will open up the feedback studio. Now, this feedback studio is kind of segmented into, it's segmented into 3 parts right here. So we have the more grading aspect here, we have the similarity plagiarism checker portion here, as well as the grammar checker tool here, if you did enable that as well. So this first portion here has the grading tools. We have a feature called quick marks, which is exactly what it sounds like. If you have any common feedback that you're giving back to students, you can actually save them all here and just drag and drop them into the file as needed. So for instance, if you need to avoid biased language, you just drag and drop that there, and students will be able to see that feedback as well. The next feature here is a feedback summary. So as an instructor, you were able to leave either a voice comment or a text comment to the students. If you enable the rubric, you will also be able to see it here and mark accordingly as well. Now, this middle section here is where we will see the plagiarism checker. As you can see, there's a number of different features and tools here. So this first one here is any flags it wants you to review. The second one here is just an overall match overview of where different aspects of the paper have been found maybe elsewhere. So for instance, reference 1 has maybe been found at a different institution in a paper submitted over there. This one has also been found on the internet, but this is just a citation. This one, I believe, as well, is just a citation as well. And then this last one here, it is found that the topic sentence is actually found somewhere else on the internet as well. So there's that. This next one here gives a list of all the sources that it has been matched against, that the paper has been matched against. So as you can see here, it will list all of them, and as well as highlight what part of the paper has been found somewhere else. Here we also have, you can change the filters and the settings on how you want that similarity report to be generated. And then here you can exclude sources as well if needed. Now the last feature here we have is the ETS grammar checking tool, which basically scans the paper for grammar, mechanics, and then any errors that it catches, it will categorize them accordingly in here as well. So that's an overview of that feedback studio, but I'll also show what that peer review looks like as well. So what this looks like is a more guided peer review. So if you remember, we created some questions earlier and I included them just right here. So as you can see, there's a text box for students to respond to, and there's also a scales for students to respond to. So again, if you want to create a more guided peer review, you can do that as well. What's cool here is that there actually are annotation tools as well. And this is something I don't believe it is really a feature anywhere else. But if you hit that tools button, it will open up this annotation toolbar. So students are able to leave text comments. They can also highlight things. And then if they would like, you can also include composition marks. So maybe there's a citation that's needed, you can flag that. Maybe something was spelled incorrectly, you can flag that as well. And then once students are done, all they'll have to do is click that submit button and it will submit it. And they'll submit it and they'll be done with the peer mark and the peer review portion of this assignment. But with that being said, before you do choose to use Turnitin or not, Gabby will chat very briefly about kind of the things to consider as well.
Thank you, Chris. All right. So now that we've gone through how to really get in and set Turnitin up, we wanted to sort of go through some of the, from our exploration of the tool and reading up about sort of the state of Turnitin at the moment, some of the more educative approaches to how we could implement it. UBC more broadly is looking, especially with the advent of generative AI tools like ChatGPT, pursuing a more educative rather than punitive approach to academic integrity. And so with something like Turnitin, which, I mean, the tool's been around for a really long time, and again, as we mentioned earlier, that some students do view it as a little punitive, thinking about how we can harness this technology as a learning tool rather than to sort of punish students or give students anxiety. So the main recommendation, especially considering the similarity report, is just that, a learning tool to allow students to better understand plagiarism and academic integrity. So when you're setting it up, if you're going to be using it in this way, the key thing really is to make sure that students do have access to that similarity report. Without seeing it, they won't be able to really understand where they're going wrong. If you don't allow them to see the similarity report, they'll still see the percentage. As far as I'm aware, Chris, that sounds right. And something that we noticed when we were Googling Turnitin is you get these like recommend or like common searches for Turnitin, and all of them were, is 30% in Turnitin okay? Is 40% all right? Is 2% good? And the reality is that the percentage itself can really vary, as Chris demonstrated, by selecting whether or not the bibliographic materials are being flagged, whether quotes are being flagged by Turnitin. So part of the important sort of educative approach to using it is making sure students can see the similarity report and see what's actually being flagged. The other thing too is just to be mindful about whether or not they can use the similarity report or generate multiple similarity reports. Again, Chris sort of demonstrated that you can choose a few different options for whether or not students will generate one or multiple similarity reports. So if it's made available immediately, but the first submission is the final similarity report, that doesn't necessarily give students the opportunity to update their work to reflect what they've learned from seeing that similarity report. That being said, because enabling the second option, which is to generate a new similarity report for each resubmission, because that overwrites and removes the previously generated report, just be mindful that if you need access to that initial similarity report for example, an issue of academic misconduct, rather than making the setting that they can, resubmit and generate multiple reports, make it so that there are multiple assignments. So they might have, say, a draft assignment that they submit first. They get one similarity report. That's the final one. They can then use that to rework their piece and then submit again to a different assignment Dropbox. So that could be a way around it, especially if we're considering the value for students in using that similarity report. The other thing too is that, as we mentioned, with students sort of feeling nervous about the percentage that they might get, is just to be really transparent with them on what Turnitin will flag. Obviously, if we're aiming for this educative approach, we want to encourage students to look at the similarity report, but there are always going to be students who are just going to look at the number. So just letting them know when you're using Turnitin that, yes, we will be flagging the bibliography, or we won't be flagging quotes, or whatever it might be. Just letting them know what settings that you've put forward. It doesn't have to be in a lot of detail, but just letting them know, yes, the bibliography won't be counted. So don't worry. Just to sort of have them be aware that their percentage is sort of going to reflect those different pieces. So I can see a lot of value from a plagiarism perspective. This can be used really, really well to, say, for example, if someone has quoted something, but they haven't done it in a way that is up to the standards of the citation that we're currently using. So that's in our faculty going to be APA 7. If it's not up to that standard, how can they adjust and change their work? And that could be a bit more of a dialogue between you as a teacher or instructor with your students. So that's the first thing. The next way we can see it being really valuable is as a learning tool for supporting the use of English language with that grammar and spelling checker tool that we mentioned earlier. So it can be turned on and off. You don't have to enable it. But if you are, for example, teaching some students who may not come from, who may not speak English as their first language, or even within Faculty of Ed, we have the English Language Institute. They are teaching English language learners. This could be a really good way to have them sort of go through their work and see what's being flagged, and again, work to improve their English language use, especially as it pertains to academic writing. And then the final piece, I think, in terms of what we can really see the value in using the tool is the peer review function. There are a ton of different peer review tools available at UBC, but this is the one that I think is sort of closest to to what is provided on Canvas. So there are some annotation functions available in peer review for Canvas, but there are a lot of weird quirks and caveats to how peer review works on Canvas. Like one example is that if you turn the peer review to anonymous, students and instructors cannot use the annotation function in SpeedGrader, which can make annotating and grading really difficult. This provides an opportunity for students to annotate a work anonymously if need be or not, depending on how you set it up. And also to review in a guided way so that they're not just, like, this is good. That they're giving sort of like criticism, which is mindful and thoughtful, and thinking about the work and grading objectively. And considering as well, this is faculty of ed, and a huge number of the folks in our students in our faculty are teacher candidates, we can really see this as an opportunity for them to practice grading, whether they're, receiving a peer's work, or maybe the assignment is for them to upload a student, a student from their practicums work, just to sort of see, okay, if I'm going to grade, like, this is what I need to consider. Use these guiding questions to guide how I'm grading. We can really see the value in teaching students about how to evaluate work. So that's really helpful as well. But of course, that's not all it could possibly do. And we're going to pass over to you now, Kapil. We have a QR code here, but I think we can just have a chat if you're interested in just some ways that you think that using Turnitin could be helpful in your own practice.
Oh, thank you, Chris and Gabby. So wonderful presentation. Yeah, I had little knowledge about how similarity report work, but I didn't know about peer mark and other things. In that sense, it's really useful. Few things to be clear about. So, okay, first thing, how is this grammar checking? How effective is it? Is it more effective than Microsoft Word? Like Microsoft Word also checks grammar. Like I've never used other things, but how effective is it in terms of checking grammar?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the testing that I have done with it in the past, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So it will flag things like incorrect word usage. The thing is that this wouldn't be used as instead of, say, Microsoft Word. It would be used after someone had produced work that they then wanted to have that would be checked through Turnitin. So again, it's sort of dependent on the context, right? So if you have English language learners who are using Microsoft Word, and I mean, Microsoft Word is far from perfect as well. Like sometimes it will make suggestions that I'm like, I know that's wrong, because it's based on like ChatGPT, it's based on like a large language model. So in that way, I would say that it sort of differs because it's not making it's not making suggestions while you're producing. It's after you've made the piece of your written work and submitted it, and then it will flag, if there are grammar and spelling issues.
Okay, thank you for that. So, like when you click to pop up the similarity report, the grammar mistakes will be highlighted, right?
Only if you've turned that function on. Yeah.
Okay.
So you could have everything done at the same time if you would like. You can have the similarity report and the grammar all.
Another question I have about the peer mark. Good to know. I have never used peer mark even in Canvas. Like, yeah, thank you, Chris, for demonstrating that. So if we enable this function, and like, for example, student A submits a work, and as an instructor, I want student B to peer mark it. Can I make that available only to student B?
Chris, I think that you're probably in a better, a
Yeah,
better,
that's
position to
actually
answer this
Yeah.
one.
a really good question. To my knowledge, I don't think you can directly pair up students per se. I think it's randomly generated, but I'd have to look more into that for sure.
We can get back to you. That was sort of my assumption too, Chris, is that when you're going through the settings, it doesn't actually give you a chance to pair students up in the same way that, like, I mean, on the Canvas peer review function does allow for this. You can choose who is looking at whose work. But again, I would imagine that with Turnitin, because the primary function is the plagiarism checker, that with PMark that might not have been something that they considered.
Mhm.
But
Okay.
in terms of its actual functionality, I would say it's a better tool than what's on Canvas. So it just comes down to what exactly you're looking for, because then it might be, there could be a different use case for either option.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, you said that people see it as a punitive approach to plagiarism. Can you elaborate that a bit?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is a little anecdotal for sure. I used Turnitin all throughout my undergraduate degree. And it was an enormous amount of anxiety for me, and a lot of my friends who used it too. There was a sense that there was like a lack of trust in and this was not at UBC, this is at a different institution. That, it was we don't trust you to know how plagiarism works. And so you're kind of being punished by being forced to put your work into this tool rather than us, as taking your work at face value, or valuing that, students understand academic integrity and plagiarism. That's not to say that all students do feel that way. But I mean, anecdotally, from folks that I've spoken to, from my own experience, it definitely didn't feel good using it, because at least in my experience, we didn't have a choice. We had to use it. And there was no discussion about why it was being used outside of, we don't trust you from the plagiarism point of view. And so that to me sort of felt a little bit like we were, being punished for like not knowing about plagiarism.
Okay. Okay.
And the other thing, like,
So
yeah, continue.
yeah, here comes the question, I guess. So when I taught in another university, I used it, and I didn't use much, but I used only the similarity report. And I use demonstrative very well. When you click the source, you can also read what sentences were copied from. So
Exactly.
that was a brilliant feature I found, and that works perfectly well for some of our online courses where we know not a lot about our students, but we just teach them, and we do not know how much, I mean, they rely on other sources and copy the things. I wish I would know more, but I cannot, because asynchronous teaching it works in that way. So
Yeah.
that puts us in a difficult situation to rely on somewhere else. Rely on somewhere else means rely on Turnitin or any other kind of software that can help us to detect whether something is copied. So I talked to some of the people a bit senior probably than you guys about why not we use it for integrating Canvas. Um, okay, I have two feedback here. One is absolutely that if bibliography is created as a separate section, and bibliography will uh, increase the similarity percentage. Unless you have the time to go into the details of it, you might penalize the student because there are more words, more sentences similar to it. I mean, when bibliography is high, then there is high similarity, and there could be other things. And the second thing is that it's not only about bibliography, it's about direct quotations. So for having a good quality work, I really value whether students have directly quoted from the sources. Otherwise, I wouldn't know students read the article, the
Totally.
readings in full, whether they got the key points, and then whether they spend enough time for understanding the material, key ideas from the reading. So in that sense, I want direct code to copy it in their assignments from the required readings at least. So the direct code will also increase the likelihood of having more similarities between, right? So these
Exactly.
things maybe you can put forward when you talk about Turnitin. I think it's in the discussion phase still. So that would be my feedback or question, whatever. Okay, thank you, Chris. You brought that when we submit to get similarity report, it compares with thousands of materials that Turnitin has deposited in its repository, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, does Turnitin also search in the website, like something called Reddit or something like Course Hero?
Yep.
And then there are bunch of other websites where students find some of the assignments answers of the courses we teach. So does Turnitin also search in the website outside of its own repository?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also
Does
checking
it?
websites, and it's checking websites. It's also checking out academic journals, articles. It's checking everything.
Okay, everything in the website.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Again, I don't know how frequently Turnitin as a company is scraping the internet for these things. So that would be something to be mindful of. But it does include like internet searches. I would imagine that it is, again, I don't know the nitty-gritty of how it exactly pulls this information, but when we had that similarity report, and maybe Chris, if you don't mind opening it up,
Yep.
it does give you a list of sources for where these things were found, and more often than not, it does end up being a website. So I think if we
Okay.
take a look, because yeah, so you're right. Like if somebody had found something from Reddit, they copy pasted somebody's work from Reddit, it would most likely pull that up.
Okay.
Even though it's not an academic site, it's just a commonly used message board. Like you can see here with the matching, it does show that. But so there's student papers, there's internet sources, and it does have like a long list of different places where things might be taken
Okay.
from.
Okay. Sounds great. Uh, okay. The next question is, okay. So I mean, my question is basically focused on whether to use it or not for detecting plagiarism. Is there any doubt that the materials we submit to Turnitin, it uses, Turnitin as a corporation, making some, does it uses our data? Our data means assignments submitted by the students, and we all of us submitted it. Do you think it also uses our own data for its benefit?
When you say uses our own data, do you mean like the submissions from students?
Like in a way, when we use it, what we do when we use Google, when we search something in Google, means that we are supporting Google to flourish.
Yeah.
We are
Yep.
supporting Google to make more money, right?
Yeah.
So do we have that fear with Turnitin as well? That's why we are a little discouraged.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that this is a completely fair question to have, especially with EdTech. I mean, Turnitin has been around since I think like the early 2000s, late 90s. Like it's existed for a long time. And it has undergone a privacy impact assessment at UBC, which means that the Privacy Matters Office has gone through a pretty rigorous check to see whether or not it meets the standards of institutions in British Columbia. And I think that this was done actually pre the changes to FIPA. If I'm not sure how familiar with FIPA you are, Capital, but it is the legislation regarding the freedom of information and privacy.
Okay.
in British
Okay,
Columbia. And up
yeah.
until November 2021, it was really strict in that you couldn't house any of any data at a public institution outside of a Canadian server. That has changed. It is now that we are allowed to do that, but that we are now obligated to do a really rigorous privacy check. So, and Chris, I might get you to link out to the LT Hub or maybe open LT Hub's instructor guide. They have some pretty good information there on how they feel about privacy. So basically that like Turnitin, like, I mean, like any company is going to be doing some kind of data tracking through cookies. But if you sort of go down, it has been verified under UBC's PIA process, but that they do recommend to create an account without any personally identifying information for privacy reasons.
Okay.
The other thing too is that if you're concerned about them using somebody's work, like a paper, that is where you would choose that submit to no repository, so that the assignment would be submitted to Turnitin just for the function of checking it against their database, rather than also submitting it to the database to then be used by other folks. I will note as well that Chris, maybe if you go back to that assignment with the that we had open with, yes, the feedback studio. If you go into the red box that you in the toolbar, just go to one that's a student paper.
Oh, yeah.
So you'll see here that even if something is flagged against a student paper, so something that they've submitted, it does have this sort of notification that it's the intellectual property of the author, meaning the student or the instructor. And so they're not actually going to show you where, or they're not going to show you the content of that paper. So again, it sort of depends on how you feel about putting work to any sort of online technology tool, right? I think Turnitin is used very, very widely. I mean, I used it during my undergraduate degree in Australia. And I, as a student, knew very little about the sort of inner workings of the tool. But it's been around for over 20 years. So that it has like a pretty broad database that it's pulling from, but it's not actively sharing it with users. Whether or not they're using it for other purposes, you would have to kind of dig into the company a little more, I think.
Yeah, before we go, just one final question. Maybe I need to have a book an appointment with you for follow-up, just to confirm
Definitely.
that if I decide to use Turnitin for my course, I need to ask a student to open their own account, submit it there, and submit me the report or something like that. I cannot get it integrated into Canvas.
Well, so in terms of the report, you have access to it as the instructor. So they would get a copy and you would get a copy. So in terms of that, you wouldn't have to request that they submit it to you. They would have to upload their work to Turnitin, but you don't have to ask them for the similarity report. You will get that automatically. That being said, if you do want to have all of this stuff, then move over to Canvas. You have to do it manually, which means using the Canvas gradebook, inputting grades accordingly that way. So it is definitely an imperfect system. We do know that Turnitin can be integrated with Canvas. I don't know if that's something that UBC is definitely going to do. It depends, I suppose, on how popular the uptake of Turnitin is sort of looking in the coming few years. But we know that it's possible. It's just whether or not UBC will do it.
I think
but once it's integrated, it's really easy to use again.
Because of all the questions, all the issues we pointed out today, maybe UBC hasn't decided to integrate into Canvas. So let it be that way. I'm open for that, but I would like to really learn a little more, and I would like to try it for a term, for a particular course, and see how it works, and then we can go ahead with that. Yeah. For now, I think thank you so much for the presentation. I think you did so well, and it was really, really helpful.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say. I would say too that if you are looking to integrate it, I'll just quickly share a couple of resources that are really we found really helpful.
Yeah,
So
how
the
about
instructor
you
guide's pretty
send me
good.
an email with all these links because I don't have time
Yes,
now to copy it. Yeah, you
no
send me an
problem.
email with all the links and that would work well.
Of course, yeah. So we can definitely send you these. We have a few other links that we'll send through as well. So LT Hub's instructor guide is very comprehensive and very up to date. LT Hub does a really good job of being on top of any like new developments with the tool. But what they don't have a student guide. So we've actually created one ourselves. We have this Canvas course called e-learning help and resources. It's for students. They can automatically enroll in it, but it goes through what Turnitin is, lets them understand the privacy implications, but then also goes through how to set up an account, how to submit a paper, how to view the similarity report, how to interpret the report. Like there's a lot of student-specific information here that isn't otherwise available. So if you're planning on using with students, we would really recommend directing them here so that they have a resource that they can go back to if they're unsure of how it works.
Yeah.
I will say too, though, that if there is a course that you're interested in using it in, we're again available for you if you need it, just to sort of have a chat about maybe like how you are thinking of using it, and then if there are ways that we can sort of set up the assignment to make sure that it works really seamlessly.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
All right, so with that, we will probably wrap up. Of course, if you want to connect with us, you always can just via email, booking a one-on-one consultation with any of us. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us in our exploration of Turnitin. I'm going to stop recording now as well. Finish up now.